All right, so this is a little bit of a different video. I actually debated on making this into a podcast or starting a podcast series, so you guys will have to let me know what you think. I'm going to try and keep this under 60 minutes. And look, I haven't been posting a whole lot of content since the final shape released, and it's not because I'm not playing the game. I haven't fallen by the wayside. I haven't given up on the game like many people. In fact, I'm probably having more fun with the game right now than I ever have. My last video was about 9 days ago, and I think I've maybe posted 5 videos since the final shape released. The reality is I could have put up at least a dozen videos this week because I played 13 different builds to farm Grandmasters and weekly campaign missions, Dual Destiny, finishing up my Pathfinders and the Pale Heart, etc. And yeah, I had a lot of fun just build crafting and kind of optimizing and perfecting those builds and endgame content. And the primary focus of this video is going to be on Titan, Prismatic Titan, because there's a lot of discussion around Prismatic Titan, how it's either just bad or it lacks variety. And I think there's a lot of things that some people are overlooking with Prismatic Titan specifically, but also, you know, there's a lot of one-dimensional thinking with Warlocks as well. Like, I mean, Getaway Artist is great, don't get me wrong, but that's pretty much all you see out there. And even though people are saying, oh, Warlock's good, there's so many different ways that you can play Warlock, I literally only ever see people just running Getaway Artist, Bleak Watcher, Arc Soul, that's it. There's a lot of different ways to play Warlock as well that I want to discuss. So yeah, let me know what you think about this style of video. I debated on just turning it into a podcast, and this is going to be covering last week in Destiny, not this week coming in Destiny. I'm not the type of content creator that does this professionally for a living. This is a hobby of mine. And as such, you know, I can only really give you information on stuff that I've already experienced in the game, right? So I know a lot of people are going to be, you know, already telling you what the god roll is for the Speleologist Solar Rapid Fire machine gun that isn't even out in the game yet, right? It's probably in a tier list somewhere, and somebody's already telling you what the god roll is. That's just not how the way I roll. I like to play with the weapons, with the builds, and, you know, fully vet or season those builds out in missions so that I can, you know, actually give you some valuable information, you know, on those things, right? So, all right, so what was I farming this last week, right? And yes, this is last week, so you might be thinking that, you know, is this information going to be valuable to you? Because, you know, we're going into a new week in Destiny. It's going to be a different Grandmaster, a different mission. We're getting an exotic mission. Maybe you're going to be doing something completely different. I think that it doesn't really matter because we're discussing build crafting primarily, and maybe a little bit of touching on some god rolls for some weapons because, you know, weapons are part of our builds. But you can take this information and you could adapt it into your own style, right? I mean, I think that the beauty of this game is the build crafting. It's the creativity, right? It's the craft part of the builds. I can give you a dim link to all these builds, but that's just gonna, then you're not actually being creative, right? You're not tailoring your build to yourself. So the information that I'm giving you here is you take little bits and pieces out of the information that I'm talking about, turn it into something of your own, and you could definitely use all kinds of this information going forward into the future, even beyond this season, I believe, because a lot of the times I'm build crafting around the idea that some principles and philosophies with builds have to you know, be sustainable as the artifact changes, as the meta changes, right? So I'm not going to be discussing the artifact a whole lot. It's more just so about build concepts. So what was I farming last week? Well, we had Exodus Crash, which is a pretty good Grandmaster to farm, right? So if you need to top up on your Ascendant Shards, generally Ascendant Shards are not an issue for me. And by the way, sorry if this video isn't super visual. Like, I'm literally just this is just a live commentary with me in the game here, So I'm not going to be showing you clips of any of the gameplay, which is why I'm saying I was kind of thinking about just turning this into a podcast. It's easier for me to do because it takes hours and hours for me to edit and stuff. Like if I could just give you a live commentary on what I was up to last week and give you some information that way, I figured maybe that's better than nothing. Maybe some people will enjoy it. I know that I enjoy listening to good information in like podcast style Destiny videos, right? Like where the visuals don't really matter. So a lot of the times, like I'll just be working and I'll stick an earbud in and I'll listen to like the PvE podcast, right, on Spotify, or even Aegis Relic. A lot of his videos are longer and there's a lot of good information in there, and you don't need to see anything visual, right? So, anyways, so obviously GMs are going to net you a lot of shards. Shards aren't really an issue unless you're masterworking armor. The real issue is Ascendant Alloys for me, because there's so many different weapons now that we can put enhanced perks on. Not just the weapon crafting, it's more so like you could literally just enhance everything that there is now. Everything that drops pretty much that's new, even over the last couple seasons, is you can enhance it, right? And it costs a fortune. I actually put out a community post a while back asking you guys what is the value of a double enhanced level 20 weapon. So actually, you know what, let me just cover that real quick before I go too much further into this video. So let me see here. So this blast furnace, right, it's not an adept, it's just a regular into the light weapon from Onslaught, and it's fully enhanced. Now if I was to take this weapon from level 0, right, non-enhanceable, and take it up to 20, and all I had was enhancement cores, right, say I had 0 Ascendant Alloys, I have 0 Prisms, right? Those are the two most valuable resources for weapon crafting, Prisms and Alloys. Well, and enhancement cores. You can't do anything without cores, right? But you can purchase Prisms and Alloys at Raoul via cores, right? You can buy 1 Prism for 10 cores, and you can buy 1 alloy for 10 prisms. So 1 alloy will cost you 100 cores, right? And it takes you 2 alloys to fully enhance a weapon. So it's 200 enhancement cores just to put those double enhanced perks, plus all of the weapon leveling to get it from level 1 to 20, right? Technically you can bring it up to 17 and be fine, but level 20 is actually going to give you, it's actually going to max out all your stats, right? And then the weapon will not improve beyond level 20. And it's also going to cost you about 6 prisms, which is another 60 cores, right? So yeah, it costs on average 333 enhancement cores to fully masterwork a weapon with double enhanced perks, right? Without having any base stock of alloys or prisms, right? So ideally, you're farming activities where you get prisms, you get alloys. And I put out another poll before this where I asked people how are they farming Ascendant Alloys, right? And the overwhelming majority of you said that you're just trading prisms and cores at Raoul to get alloys. So you're just buying them, right? And if you're actually enhancing weapons left and right, you're going to run out of that stuff before you know it. And when you consider the fact that an Ascendant Alloy is worth 100 enhancement cores, and all you got to do is run 1 weekly Witch Queen mission on Master Difficulty or Lightfall mission, right? To get that Ascendant Alloy, that seems way more valuable to me as opposed to burning all of your enhancement cores, right? Depending on how much you have that you want to enhance as far as weapons go. Right, so doing these weekly Witch Queen missions and Lightfall missions are a pretty good, it's a good source for farming up those alloys and saving on materials, right? So that's what I was doing, farming Exodus Crash. Exodus Crash, because it's a Nightfall, you get a lot of prisms, right? So the downside with the weekly Witch Queen missions and Lightfall is that you don't get any prisms, you just get alloys, right? You do the Nightfalls, you get cores, you get prisms, you get Ascendant Shards. But the prisms being the main thing because you need those prisms to enhance your weapons. Right, so as far as the builds that I was using to farm these missions, and I'll cover Dual Destiny and my Pale Heart build as well. So I think there's, let's see, I've got 3 or 4 different variations on the exotic class item, where it's basically using the same build. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about here was non-knockout builds, mainly because I listened to another video from Kodiak today, where he was discussing, you know, Prismatic Titan being trash except for Knockout and Consecration, right? Because if you're not using Knockout and Consecration, then you're basically, you know, the subclass is just trash. And he made some very valid points, but one of the things that was not brought up was Facet of Blessing. So here's the one thing that I've been doing to build craft into Prismatic Titan, and I have 3 builds here to go over that do not involve using the exotic class items or Syntheseps, and as such, Knockout is not part of these builds. So the first one, let's see, I'll go over the Abeyant Leaps build. And the interesting thing here is that I brought this into Master Last Chance, and keep in mind, Master Last Chance for the weekly Witch Queen mission is pretty much Grandmaster difficulties, just way more forgiving, because if you wipe as a team, or if you go in solo and you wipe, you can invite players midway through the mission. You just restart at your rally flag until you get it done. It's not really a huge deal, so you can kind of mess around a little bit. It's a little bit more forgiving, but you definitely need the same level of build crafting that you would need to bring into a Grandmaster. So it's a good place to test builds. So one of the things that I was doing in Last Chance, I went into it with Abeyant Leaps, and I've actually been using this build quite a bit on Prismatic Titan, and you can compare this to the Abeyant Leaps build on Strand, and I actually think that this build is probably better than the Abeyant Leaps build on Strand, right? Technically, you can get some more suspend uptime, right? Because you can use Thread of Continuity to extend the duration of suspend on the Strand kit. You can't get that on Prismatic, but you can spam your Drenger's Lash Barricade just as easily as you can on Strand, right? On Berserker, because you have Facet of Hope, right? So basically, the whole concept behind Abeyant Leaps on Prismatic Titan is you need to have an elemental buff so that you can get your class ability back fast, right? So obviously you have Drenger's Lash. You can throw on a Shackle Grenade as well, just to supplement that suspend. Whenever you suspend something, you get Woven Mail thanks to Abeyant Leaps, and that is not Spirit of the Abeyant. Spirit of the Abeyant does not give you Woven Mail, right? It'll give you the triple lashes on your barricade, but that's it. Right, so the main value of Abeyant Leaps is the Woven Mail that you're getting for free when you suspend stuff, right? And so that plays into Facet of Hope, which gives you more class ability regen, right? So that's the concept there. And think of it this way: on Strand Titan, if you're building into Drenger's Lash and Abeyant Leaps, then your melee isn't, you know, yeah, you got 3 Frenzy Blades on Strand, but you're not using Syntheseps, so it's not like you're necessarily doing like a 1-2 punch thing on a Suspend build. But on Prismatic, you have Consecration, right? So you can still have the triple Frenzy Blades, but you could just turn each one of those into Consecration. The enemies are suspended, and you can just ignite them from further away, as opposed to going up close and using your Frenzy Blades like you would have to do on Strand, right? So it's basically the same potency of Suspend on Prismatic Titan, but you also have Consecration instead of Frenzy Blade, which just makes it that much better, on top of the fact that you can pop your Transcendence and then just spam everything left and right? So it's like having Transcendence on Titan is like having an extra super with the amount of Consecration spam that you get. But obviously, because we have to use Drenger's Lash, it means we can't use Knockout, right? And so that is the contentious aspect that that a lot of people are saying. Well, you can't go without Knockout and Consecration, because Knockout is your only source of healing. But we have this fragment here that seems to be overlooked. It's called Facet of Blessing. I haven't heard very many people talk about it. It shares the same icon as Echo of Leeching, I believe, from the Void subclass, right? So you get health regen on melee kills, and this also works with glaives, but it works with any type of melee kill, right? Whether you're punching or using a glaive or using your powered melee, your health is going to start to kick in. And I've heard that it can, the health regen can be interrupted as soon as you take damage, so it's not as good as knockout, and it's health regen. It's not like a cure style of health that you're getting back. Like knockout now gives you basically like cure. Whenever you kill something, you just get an immediate chunk of health, right? So knockout is definitely superior as far as healing goes, but you're not left with nothing if you go without knockout. You can still use Facet of Blessing, and technically it doesn't cost you an aspect, because if I go with knockout, you only have 5 fragments, right? Knockout is the only fragment or aspect on Titan that only gives you 2 fragment slots. All the other ones give you 3, right? So it means that you can use any of these other aspects and really not lose a whole lot, because you just replace it with Blessing, right? So you're not losing any aspect because you're just getting Blessing there, and that frees up an aspect to do something a little bit more creative, right? And so and it's not that I'm recommending that you do this with just any old build. I think it really does have to be relevant. It has to synergize. So like a Bant Leaps is a potent exotic. It gives you Woven Mail. That's always valuable. So I think in this case it works, right? And then you could also rely on other aspects like Facet of Solitude to give yourself even more damage resistance by severing enemies, right? That it decreases enemy damage output by 40%, so that's very good. Yeah, so I mean, and then you've got a range super instead of Blade Fury if you need to use that. So this is a good build. I use this to farm the Last Chance. One of the LFGs that I was in, I make all my posts for these, and I just let people join as I'm going through them solo, and typically people will join before I get to the end solo, right? And so one of the guys joined me, and then he got on mic, and normally I'm on, I'm just doing these no mic, but he's like, hey, I got a question if you don't mind. And so I said, yeah, sure. And he was asking me about Prismatic Titan, and he was asking me about my build, and he wanted more information on this build, and he was saying, I thought this was really good on Strand. I'm like, yeah, try it out on Prismatic. It's pretty good. I guess he was impressed by the gameplay, so I kind of gave him a rundown on the build. So that's that one there. And then as far as the weapons, so like I'm using Buried Bloodline to supplement this build. So because we need an elemental buff, right, which includes Devour, right? So as long as we have Woven Mail or Devour, which we'll have frequently on this build, then we're always going to be getting our class ability back, right? So we're going to be able to spam that Suspend just as often as we would on Strand, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and then I'm using Imminence and Pro Memoria here because Imminence, the Strand SMG from Salvation's Edge, is overcharged all season long. Master difficulty activities have the overcharged weapon modifier, so you can use overcharged armory from the weapons artifact to get that 25% buff on Dealer's Choice weapons, Collective Purpose weapons, Radiolaria Transposer weapons, and the Sundering weapons from Warlord's Ruin, right? So all of those classes of origin trait weapons can get a 25% damage buff in overcharged weapon modifiers activities like Grandmasters and Master weekly campaign missions, etc. Right? So I try to, as much as possible, make sure that all of my weapons are overcharged and can fit the role of stunning champions as needed. So in Last Chance we have barriers, we have unstops, so I have an unstoppable sidearm via Buried Bloodline and an anti-barrier SMG with Chaos Reshaped. So once I get this thing procced with Chaos Reshaped, is up to a 35% damage buff, I believe. So it's actually very good at breaking barrier shields. You do have to get a little bit close, but mainly because it's a lightweight frame weapon, so it's 900 RPMs, which means that it's going to suffer at range, right? The stability is a little all over the place, which is why I ended up going with Perpetual Motion here for my enhanced perk, because that really increases the stability a lot. I did the same thing with Michael's Reverence, which is like the rapid fire sidearm from Root of Nightmares, because that thing is just all over the place as far as recoil stability, and it definitely helps to have something like Perpetual Motion on there just to make it feel a lot more like a laser beam. and I'm pretty much always moving around on a weapon like that anyway, so it fits really well. But I would recommend that you just play around with it in the Enclave and see how it feels, right? You can definitely test perpetual motion in the Enclave and see how that feels, right? Pro Memoria, super good. I love Demolitionist as a perk. I have it on any chance I get to put this thing on a machine gun, I'll go for it, because you just get so much grenade energy just because you can kill so many enemies so fast with machine guns. And then, it's an automatic reload for you when you do throw that grenade. So it's very good. And then I just went with Frenzy as a standard damage buff here because it's just more, it's more automatic to me. As opposed to something like Bait and Switch, where, yeah, you might want to use the machine gun on a champion, in which case you could do like a little rotation with your other 2 weapons first to proc Bait and Switch and then focus that buff on a beefy target. But, it does require you to do that legwork first. You can use target lock, but then if if the target moves, target lock's not very good unless the enemy is just staying still and staying alive long enough for you to build up that target lock. But you're also putting yourself at risk by using target lock. So because you have to stand there outside of cover doing sustained damage while you're also taking damage, right? So Frenzy is just always good. It's only 15% compared to those other buffs, but it just kicks in pretty much automatically whenever you need to use a machine gun. Chances are you've already been in combat for a while, so Frenzy's going to be active. If you do need to reload, you've got max reload speed. You've got the max handling, so it feels very good to use it. Yeah, and it's pretty much always there. It's reliable, and this aggressive frame machine gun is just very good in general, right? So the other 2 builds that I used that were non-knockout Consecration builds, and yes, they're all Consecration builds, right? So I do think that you're definitely suffering. You're making it hard on yourself on Prismatic Titan if you're not using Consecration. I mean, that is the identity of Prismatic Titan. It's Consecration. Knockout is just the supplement for healing with the Consecration. It's not necessarily the identity. I think the identity is Consecration, at least as far as endgame, because I mean, you just kill stuff so fast with Consecration and do so much ad clear. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and that is definitely the case with Consecration. If you're not using it in endgame, then you're better off just using, a different subclass like Strand Titan or Solar Titan, and that way you can have access to like Banner of War and Soul Invictus and Restoration, or even Overshields on Void, right? Yeah, I don't think that there's much point in playing Prismatic Titan in endgame without Consecration, right? But I'm just giving you creative ways to use Consecration. So here on the Second Chance build, this is a lot of fun as well. So the interesting thing here with Second Chance is that you're giving up that triple charge of Consecration, right? And I've seen a lot of Second Chance builds where they're not using Consecration. Oh, well, actually, this is a knockout build. So, excuse me, I was wrong about that. But you want to go with knockout here because it's actually going to increase the damage of your shield throw when you use it. So even though you're using Consecration, keep in mind you have 2 shield throws, right? So this is almost as good as having 3 Frenzied Blades, right? You're not losing a lot. You're losing 1 charge, but you're also gaining a charge. So if you're using any other melee, like you would be suffering using Consecration, right? Only having 1 charge. The interesting thing here, though, is that you can have 2 charges of your shield throw. You can use 1 to break barriers to weaken enemies, and give yourself a Void Overshield. Sure, I mean, that's okay. But I mean, the main idea here is that you can weaken enemies and proc Radiant. You can proc Radiant from range. If you're using Frenzied Blade, then you have to get up close and to get Radiant off of an enemy, right? And you're not weakening them. Or use Consecration. But I mean, this is a very versatile setup here. So we can still use Knockout and Consecration to do massive damage and get healing, right, when we need it. And we can also weaken enemies that are at range where it's not safe to go up and consecrate them, or if, yeah, sometimes it's just not safe, right? Maybe you don't want to go up to a barrier and consecrate it when it's in the middle of putting its shield up and a whole bunch of things blast you, right? So being able to break barrier shields with it is cool, but I think the main benefit of shield throw is on second chance is that weaken, and it's proccing radiant from range, right? So Facet of Dawn, this is literally the best melee for Titan to get radiant, right? So it means that you can use this not just in like master level activities like the Witch Queen ones and GMs, but you can also use this in a damage rotation versus a raid boss, right? Or a dungeon boss, right? I mean, sure, you've got your Twilight Arsenal that you can weaken the enemy with, but this is also going to give you Radiant consistently. And if you pop your Transcendence, it means you can just throw shield throw after shield throw, constantly weaken, constantly keep Radiant uptime. So it's very useful. And when you do pop Transcendence, it's not noticeable. You literally do not notice the difference between having 3 Frenzy Blade charges and 2 shield throw charges. You can still spam Consecration and throw shields at the same time, just non-stop while you're in Transcendence. It's actually ridiculous, and it's a lot of fun. So I think that is my one takeaway with the second chance build is that don't give up Consecration. It might sound counterintuitive, but just don't. You still want to use it. Consecration is still the main strength of Prismatic Titan. Shield throw is never going to be good enough by itself. You just want to use that as a buffer and as a way to break up your gameplay loop. So it gives you more versatility, right? Basically, allows you to do different things. So that's my advice there for the second chance build. The weapons are pretty much whatever you want to use. And then, so the other build that I went into here, and this is a non-knockout build. So I just wanted to give this a shot. I've been kind of obsessed with this whole like solar and stasis identity, like fire and ice builds. It originally started out with my hunter because we've got the transcendent grenade on hunter that does scorch and slow and freeze and ignite, right? So I'm like, oh, this would be perfect. I could just build craft completely into solar and stasis. And so I was inspired to do this on Titan after fully realizing that you can't go without Consecration on Titan. But it just so happens that we have some pretty decent stasis stuff on Titan as well with Diamond Lance. Diamond Lance is definitely not bad. Facet of Ruin is an excellent fragment that's available to all subclasses, and this allows you to double dip into Shatter and Ignitions, right? So you can literally, with this fragment, make your fire and ice builds. And it's fun, and it's effective in endgame as well. I use this to farm the last chance, and I'm tempted to put up some clips. I got some really good clips of just annihilating rooms with Glacial Quake and Dragon's Breath. So we're using Consecration, we're using Diamond Lance, and then to make up for not having Knockout, we're using Facet of Blessing so we can still heal on our Consecrations, right? And then Facet of Courage is just kind of a staple fragment to buff your Consecration even more by 10% whenever you apply Darkness debuff, which you're always going to be doing because you're doing a lot of stasis, right? We're using Glacial Grenade, so we don't have to use like Dominance to give Jolt or Weaken to our other grenades. We're not using Shackle. This is just purely Shatter and Ignite, right? So Glacial Quake, it's a lot of crystals. And you can combine that with Dragon's Breath, right? So the weapons that I'm using, and the exotic here that I'm using is Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap. And honestly, you can go with like Syntheseps and just be a complete monster with this build because Glacial Quake technically can do the most amount of total damage in the game as far as a damage super goes. So yeah, you can really get a lot of damage out of this, especially if you went Synthos. But even without Synthos, just popping your super on like an unstop and shoot a Dragon's Breath and then pop your super, and it's gonna be hilarious. Like you're gonna, in 2 Glacial Quake slams with that Dragon's Breath on the unstop, they're just gonna be dead, and it's the effects are amazing. right? So Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap obviously allows you to turn all of your diamond lances into mini glacial grenades, right? You throw that lance anywhere and it makes a stasis crystal, right? And on top of that, if you have a rally barricade down and you're doing precision damage from behind your barricade, you get a lance right there next to you. You can literally just, while you're shooting, pick up the lance. While your crosshair is still on the enemy at range, you throw your lance at the enemy. Now they're frozen with a crystal under them, and you could just immediately shatter them with your weapon as you're still shooting. It's just a very rewarding style of ranged gameplay that you'd have to go and experience it for yourself, and I'll probably have to put up some clips because I have done Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap builds before on the channel, and I think I was farming GMs last season with it on stasis, but it's really fun on solar as well. So the weapons I'm using here to max out all of these effects are Nullify. Obviously, I already mentioned Dragon's Breath, but Nullify from Salvation's Edge, it's a pulse rifle, right? So we can break barrier shields with it. It's also collective purpose, so I mean, it's always going to be overcharged when that modifier is active. So even if there's no barriers and you don't want to use the mod for whatever reason, you can still get that 25% extra damage buff. This thing rolls with Heal Clip and Incandescent, and I've got a really good adept roll with Firefly and Incandescent, but Heal Clip is just too valuable in endgame, I think, and this is a great pulse rifle. I'm not a huge fan of using legendary primary weapons in endgame, especially with the rocket sidearm meta that we have right now, and even exotic primaries. Like, it feels very underwhelming a lot of the times to use legendary primaries. But if you're at range, this thing's pretty good. It's a new frame, being the heavy burst, so I think it's like a double. It's kind of like Revision 0. So it's a heavy hitter, and it's a very precise at long range. So this is actually perfect for Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap. You just put up your barricade, go to town with this pulse rifle, land those precision hits. You're going to just be throwing diamond lances left and right as you're shooting with Nullify. And then you're just going to be combining those incandescent explosions with shatter damage, totally double dipping into Facet of Ruin. So this is a lot of fun. You'll have to give it a shot, really. So that's pretty much it for so Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap, Second Chance, Abeyant Leaps. There's 3 different builds that you can use on your Consecration Titan builds that are not Synthos related and not heavily reliant on knockout. The other build that I took into GMs and Last Chance, I wanted to go back to Striker because, well, Arc Titan got a few buffs with this season and is still not very good. I'm just going to tell you like it is right now. Thunderclap did get a buff, so it's better. Also, Storm Grenades got a buff, but unfortunately, Storm Grenades don't really give you much. And it wasn't a huge buff either. Compared to Pulse Grenades, Touch of Thunder Pulse Grenades are just still the best grenades. In my opinion, Pulse Grenades and Vortex Grenades are absolutely the best, but Touch of Thunder just makes Pulse Grenades even better. You get like 7-8 Ionic Traces as the Pulse Grenades do tick damage. You combine that with Spark of Magnitude for extended duration, and you're just going to be able to throw back-to-back Pulse Grenades. So it's very good. It's situational. You do need to use it on beefy targets like champions and mini bosses or bosses, right? It's not an ad clear grenade. I mean, it's effective for ad clear, but if you really want to maximize the potential of Arc Titan with Touch of Thunder, then you use those pulse grenades situationally on the beefiest targets, right? You use this on the Brig in the opening encounter in Exodus Crash, and you're just going to see all the Ionic Traces feeding back to you one after the next, and by the time you pick up that last trace, you're pretty much going to be able to throw another pulse grenade. So it's quite good. Combine that with Spark of Shock, obviously, for the jolt damage, and you can just totally take care of overloads. That's one of the best things about this build is you don't even need to use a overload weapon if you have pulse grenades, because you're going to stun the overload with your pulse grenade. They're going to be stuck in the pulse grenade, and by the time it's done ticking and you get those traces, you can throw another pulse grenade, right? And by that time, the overload's probably dead anyway, especially if you combine it with like an explosive light auto-loading holster rocket launcher like I am here with Hothead, right? So you just get that pulse grenade on there or that initial stun, combine that with a rocket shot, and the overload is dead. So yeah, that's the strength with Striker, but also Spark of Beacons in general for all subclasses got a buff. So now heavy weapons, heavy arc weapons can blind enemies. So I like to use Spark of Beacons wherever possible. It's obviously it's amazing with the Rocket Sidearm with Indebted Kindness, or even Forbearance, right? But I mean, Forbearance isn't really in the artifact right now. Rocket Sidearms are, and they're very ammo efficient. They can do everything. So yeah, you can use like Song of Your Ute, which I was using. I was using Indebted Kindness and Song of Your Ute just to kind of like see how good Spark of Beacons would be, you know, just blinding everything. But the thing is, you're just being redundant by using an add clear weapon like Indebted Kindness with an add clear heavy weapon like Song of Your Ute. So I just switched to Hothead with Explosive Light and auto loading to be much more efficient at taking out champs and the mini bosses, etc. Right? Because Indebted Kindness is already doing enough of the add clear. And then Wish Ender just to take care of the take care of barriers and any ranged combat, especially if I'm running low on ammo. It's very good there. But generally speaking, yeah, you're still better off just consecrating the heck out of everything, right? Just go on Prismatic and just blow everything up. This is a much slower build. I was combining it with Precious Scars. And yeah, Precious Scars is always good. It's just a very good neutral exotic to use on some of the weaker subclasses like Striker, like Void Titan. As long as you're synergizing your weapons with your subclass, you're gonna get that healing. You get that restoration for you and your allies. So I mean, very easy to kill things with Indebted Kindness, which means you're pretty much always proccing restoration. You kill something, you reload. Well, I mean, you kill something, you've got restoration. You reload, you apply Jolt. Yeah, it's a pretty good time. So I use this in both the Last Chance and Exodus Crash. But at the end of the day, you know, like you want to get stuff done fast, just switch over to Prismatic. I mean, that's really it. And then as far as the other builds that I was using, I used a variety of class items to do like Dual Destiny, a bit of Exodus Crash farming. One of the things that I like to use whenever there's overloads involved is I still do not have Inmost Synthos, by the way. I hardly have any Inmost Light, Spirit of Inmost, and I hardly have any Spirit of Synthos in general. I have like 2 of each, and I have like 45 unique Titan class exotic items. So those are the only 2 spirits that I do not have good RNG on. But the class item that I like to use the most when there's overloads is Inmost Contact. Because Contact is just going to make it so that your Consecration stuns overloads, and when you have 3 charges, yeah, the overload's going to be dead, and you'll never have to use a weapon. So the cool thing about it is you don't have to use an overload weapon, especially if you're using like a Pulse Grenade with Facet of Dominance. So now your Pulse Grenade jolts and your Consecration jolts, and that is plenty to take care of overloads. I mean, and especially so if you're transcendent, then just forget it. You don't need to use weapons. Yeah, so Spirit of Contact, great utility there. Also super good for ad cleared, like just the jolt on every consecration just makes like your consecration effect like twice as wide, kind of like Severance. So yeah, that is definitely my go-to right now is Inmost and Contact. But I decided to mix it up a little bit. I tried out Assassin and Scars. So I think I switched my super off of Twilight Arsenal over to Blade Fury. And then I was using Pro Memoria and the Call just for my ad clear. Both of them have Demolitionist. They're both overcharged. Both being strand weapons, matching my strand super. It means I get restoration on every kill. So this is a very good way to play into survivability on Prismatic Titan without knockout. Right, and then but I mean I am still using knockout. I'm using knockout and consecration obviously, but yeah, pretty much with all of the exotic class items I'm using knockout and consecration. I mean, it's just different mixes of class items that I use here, but yeah, it's a great way to get healing at range with Spirit of Scars. And then Assassin, just for additional survivability, right? You can go invis on those melee kills. You can res your teammates, pretty useful there. And Blade Fury is always a good super, just in general, especially being a roaming super. It's another way to go and res teammates, be the last man standing, and be successful at it. Yeah, and I also tried in Dual Destiny, I brought in Spirit of Severance and Synthos. So, I mean, Synthos is like, it's kind of almost night and day how much more damage you do when you've got Biotic Enhancements procced with Syntheseps. Like, you could just nuke everything. Like, a champion is not 2 or 3 consecrations, it's 1 consecration and they're dead. So that's how good Syntheseps is. And then adding Spirit of Severance to it is... yeah, without Inmost Light, it means that you're not going to be able to spam your consecration as much when you're not Transcendence, but you'll be waiting a little bit on your consecration without Inmost. But Severance is going to increase the effect of your consecration in basically the same way that Spirit of Contact does, but without the jolt and without any visual effects. I find Severance is like a non-noticeable thing. It's like, I know that it does a lot of extra damage. It does a lot of extra ad clear. But the only time I really ever noticed Severance in action was when I accidentally used a Blade Fury or a Frenzied Blade instead of my Consecration just by user error. And when I did that Frenzied Blade, like, it just annihilated everything around me. So that was like the only time I really noticed Severance doing anything, because Consecration already sets off an ignition, and you know, it has a wide radius, wide damage radius to begin with the initial wave, and then the slam down, and then the ignition on top of that. So it's like everything's already dead anyway by the time like the Severance effect has, you know, can really do much. And there's no like visual, there's nothing visual to really indicate what it's doing. So, but yeah, that's it for the Titan. So actually no, Pale Heart, I've gone over this build, I've made a video on it, but this is still, like, even despite using all of those consecration builds, this is the only Prismatic Titan build where I do not use consecration. It's because we're in the Pale Heart, and you're actually just more efficient using Knockout and Diamond Lance with infinite Thunderclap, because Thunderclap is going to take care of every single enemy that's not a boss tier enemy. And if you do run into a boss tier enemy, you just Thunder Crash them and they're dead. Thunder Crash is pretty bad in end game activities. Like, you can't even nuke a champion with Thunder Crash. But in the Pale Heart, you can nuke everything. You can take everything to its damage gate. Anything that doesn't have a damage gate, you can just kill them outright with it. So it's definitely good enough, especially with Facet of Courage. I just use my weapons with Solitude to proc that Sever and create the Darkness debuff, and then I can use my Facet of Dominance Pulse Grenade. This is basically a Arc Titan build, like a Striker build, but on Prismatic. And it's built for speed and efficiency for farming the Pale Heart. You're always amplified. You have infinite Thunderclap, right? That's more infinite than having 3 consecrations, right? So yeah, it's still, and then you combine that with Facet of Ruin. Everything that you Thunderclap is going to create a Diamond Lance, and then you use the Diamond Lance to freeze everything around you, and then use just Thunderclap frozen targets, and then the shatter damage and the increased shatter damage, like radius, I should say. It definitely takes care of things fast. So, and I just use that with Critical Anomaly so that I can take care of range targets. You know, Critical Anomaly basically performs like a heavy linear fusion rifle in the Pale Heart. Like, you can pretty much take care of anything. And then Risk Runners for survivability. And I mean, you're always taking arc damage, so it's just extra damage resistance. And then obviously an Eager Edge Sword. Yeah. So that's it for the Titan. I'll go over the Warlock and Hunter next. Alright, so for my Warlock this week, I didn't spend a whole lot of time, mainly because last week I was farming the Cunning. Yeah, the Cunning was the weekly Witch Queen mission last week, so I was farming a lot of Ascendant Alloys with Getaway Artist. So I'm not going to be talking about Getaway Artist here. I wanted to focus on a couple other builds. I've basically got 3 different Warlock builds that I used this week. The main one that I was using to farm the Last Chance and Exodus Crash on GM was Necrotic Synthos. And one of the things that I discovered is, because this Necrotic Synthos good is very class item is very good for especially the Lightning Surge build. which is what I primarily used. But if you're gonna do like more ranged style of combat, then I think Necrotics and Claw would probably serve you better. Having 4 arcane needles instead of 3 would just, or you know, an extra melee charge for any melee was definitely better, better than just 1, and especially when you're, you know, fighting enemies at range, because you're not going to be taking full advantage of Syntheseps, right? So if you're going to use Syntheseps, then you have to go out on a limb, right? You have to take the risk, you have to play aggressive, you have to get up there and make use of that, right? So I tried my best to make full use of Necrotic and Synthos by using Lightning Surge, right? So, and this is a ton of fun in the Last Chance. The Last Chance is one of my favorite missions in the Witch Queen. There's a really good variety of combat sections, and then the final encounter where you got the final rally flag, you go through a series of 3 different rooms, and they're quite close quarters. And there's a lot of different enemies, so Lightning Surge is it's super fun. It's like Consecration levels of fun, but on Warlock. You're spreading poison everywhere, you're doing jolt damage with all the chain lightning, and you could spam it in Transcendence like the same way that you can with Consecration on Titan. So super fun. Especially if there's overload champions involved, which there isn't in the Last Chance, then it's even more effective, right? But there are overloads in Exodus Crash, so that's why I used it in both. So the setup that I use here for Necrotic Synthos is I use Bleak Watcher and Lightning Surge, obviously. Bleak Watcher, to me, is going to give you more value than Feed the Void. Feed the Void is definitely nice because it's going to give you a full heal on those Lightning Surge kills, gives you more grenade energy. You can, you know, combine it with like Vortex grenades. But the thing is, with this aggressive style of gameplay, being able to have frozen enemies to go up into the thick of is just, it's so good for survivability, and to make up for not having Feed the Void, just like the whole principle with going without knockout on Consecration with Titan, is you just use Faceted Blessing, right? So you're still going to get healing when you go up into the thick of things and melee enemies, right? So protection, courage, because we want to increase the damage of our Lightning Surge. Blessing, like I said, we could use Facet of Ruin here, because Facet of Ruin is much more valuable on Stasis Shatter than it is on Solar Ignitions, right? Because on Solar Ignitions, it only increases the radius of the ignition, it doesn't increase the damage, but on Shatter, it increases both the damage and the radius. So it's definitely doing a lot more with Shatter. So your Bleak Watcher with Facet of Ruin and Lightning Surge, you're gonna be like, when you use your Lightning Surge, you're gonna be shattering everything, you're gonna be spreading poison, and you're gonna be jolting. It's actually super effective. It's very, very good. And then you can proc Radiant at the same time with Facet of Dawn, take care of barriers. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the build. Healing Grenade, just so you can throw those stasis turrets more often. I think it doesn't have its own cooldown, unlike on stasis on Shadebinder, where you use Bleak Watcher, it just automatically changes all your grenade cooldowns to the Bleak Watcher turret cooldown, which is like 2.5 minutes. But on Prismatic Titan or Prismatic Warlock, it doesn't seem to do that. And then I'm using Nova Bomb here just because it's the most amount of burst damage. You can just one-shot anything. Any champions are going to die. Any mini-bosses are just going to die. It's going to take anything to its health gate. Nova Bomb is that good, especially when Void is surging for the weak, which it is. Then we can double dip into Spirit of Necrotics by using Osteostriga or Thorn. So for the Last Chance, I used Osteostriga because it's very good on barriers. It's like having Kinetic Tremors is very good for champions, because especially barriers like Blast Furnace, because when the barrier puts its shield up, if the Kinetic Tremors have already been procced, it's going to break the barrier. Like if you have to stop to reload but your Kinetic Tremors are still going, like it's gonna do the work for you. So Osteostriga works the same way with the poison damage over time, right? Kinetic Tremors is also a damage over time effect. So Osteostriga is really good on barriers. And even though this thing got a nerf, it's still very good on single targets. It's basically unchanged on single targets. It's just more of the ad clear, like it doesn't spread as much poison as frequently, but it's still really good for ad clear. So like, I mean, it was broken before. Like it was just so broken that I think, yeah, now it's just really good. It's definitely not bad at all. It's not even average. It's just really good. It's just not as busted as it was. Then for Exodus Crash, I was using Indebted Kindness and Hothead. Actually, I was using the same, I was using this setup on both, right? I think on Exodus Crash, I actually switched Osteostriga out for Thorn at one point. Obviously, Thorn is going to take care of Overload champions, but Thorn is also just better all around for doing ranged. For shooting enemies at range, Thorn is much more precise. It hits way harder than Osteostriga, so it's very good. Right. The only issue is in Exodus Crash is how are you going to break barriers, or how are you going to break barriers in general? If you don't want to use double primary, then you're stuck using like a sniper, and I'm not a huge fan of using sniper rifles on console, so I think I ended up just relying on Radiant, because I was able to spam Arcane Needles and my Lightning Surge enough that I was able to get Radiant when I needed, and I was playing with teammates. So yeah, I just kind of forfeited my barrier weapon to go with Thorn instead and just be a little bit more effective at range. But for the last chance, I would definitely just stick with Osteostriga. And then I also use this Necrotic Synthos build for farming the Pale Heart. This is just my go-to build for farming up class items and getting my Ergo Sums. And this is a little bit of a different variation as far as the fragments and stuff go. Instead, I'm using Facet of Solitude just for a little bit of extra survivability, and I use Thorn here as well in the Pale Heart. That way I can take care of enemies at range, kind of like a sniper rifle almost. And I use a glaive and a eager-edged sword, because the glaive is also going to spread poison. It's also going to benefit from Spirit of Synthos. You pair that with Facet of Blessing again, right? And you're going to get health regen on kills. And then I just use, instead of Lightning Surge for the Pale Heart build, I just use Feed the Void. So I just have Devour procced all the time. I can throw Bleak Watchers left and right. Lightning Surge is overkill anyway when you have a glaive and a necrotic weapon. Then what else did I use? I used for Dual Destiny, I used my Nezrek build. So this is... I'm missing a couple weapons here. Let me switch. So I was using Imminence and Buried Bloodline. This is an extremely effective... I've used this to farm weekly campaign missions as well. But yeah, Nezrek Sin gives you a ton of grenade energy, and obviously on Prismatic Warlock we've got the best grenades. We've got Vortex Grenades with Facet of Dominance. They can weaken. That weaken is also going to apply to your Freezing Singularity, right? So when you're Transcendence, then you can also debuff enemies with Feed the Void, right? So you get Devour all the time. Buried Bloodline is going to benefit from that Devour. You're going to weaken everything. Especially with the seasonal artifact, with like expanding Abyss and getting Void Overshields by killing weakened targets is very good. All you got to do is kill enemies with Void weapons, and you're just going to be spamming grenades left and right and getting your super back, right? So Nova Bomb spam, Vortex Grenade spam. Nezrek Sin is a top tier exotic for Prismatic Warlock. And then I think I'm using... no, I'm not using Facet of... where is it? Facet of Bravery. If you wanted to use Facet of Bravery to get volatile rounds, you certainly could. But I just value stuff like Facet of Solitude for severing enemies and proccing Radiant with my Arcane Needle a little bit extra. And then with Feed the Void, I'm using Weaver's Call. I would say that Helion is a better aspect because you can ignite enemies, but the thing is, you want dark damage and light damage because we're spamming vortex grenades and using void weapons. It means that we need to really work on our dark meter to get our transcendence up quicker. So Arcane Needle is helping us there. Facet of Solitude with the Severing Blast is helping us. We're spawning Tangles for dark damage, and then Weaver's Call to just spawn those threadlings when we cast our Rift. It's also going to give us automatic dark damage, right? So that's pretty much it for that build right there. Then I'll go into Hunter next. All right, so for my Hunter builds this week, I went into Exodus Crash with this Gerfalcon's build because I wanted to pull out Collective Obligation. I hadn't used it in a while. Can't speak no more. Pulse Rifles got a buff with the final shape, obviously. They take care of barrier champions, and the fact that you can suppress enemies with this means that you can take care of overload champions and barrier champions with one weapon, which is pretty cool. And Gerfalcon's Hauberk is pretty much the best build to max out your Collective Obligation effects as frequently as possible. The other option would be to use Controlled Demolition with a suppressor grenade and Echo of Undermining, right? So you apply Weaken on your grenade. Yeah, so on Titan you can use Controlled Demolition. You can do it that way, but then it's 100% reliant on your grenade to get those effects. Whereas with Night Stalker, you can just use Gerfalcon's Hauberk so that you pretty much always have volatile rounds at the very least, and then when you throw your suppressor grenade, you also can leech the suppression effect and weaken, so you can just get those three bars filled up on Collective Obligation. As long as you always have a beefy target to apply those buffs to and leech those buffs off of, then you can just keep the Collective Obligation loop going. This definitely takes a lot of practice and getting used to, but it is a very effective weapon. Not so much on the kill board though. That is the one thing I will say. Bringing this into Exodus Crash, you're not going to be on the leaderboard as far as kills, but you can definitely take credit for some of those kills that your allies are getting, because you are doing all the debuffs. That is basically your job, right? So I'm using tether here. We can tether all the enemies for our allies, and then we could just spread suppression and weaken and volatile all over the place. And then your Consecration Titan on your team and your Arc Soul Getaway Artist, Warlocks, they're just going to be annihilating all of those debuff targets, and you can just quietly sit in the background and thank yourself for helping them out, right? And then the other thing that I wanted to try here, super fun, and it's mainly because we have that brig at the beginning, but with Exodus Crash, it's also a fallen mission, so you get a lot of different vehicle type enemies. So Deconstruct. So I wanted to use my Edge Transit here with Envious Assassin and Deconstruct. I also have a Cascade Point Deconstruct, and this is so much fun. The brig, I was able to just delete in one mag with Edge Transit. Deconstruct is like a 40% damage buff versus vehicles. Not only that, but it refills the magazine as you do damage. So when you have Envious Assassin, you're going to burn up all of your overflowed ammo first. So then when you get down to the base mag with backup mag, which is 7, then you're going to notice that all of a sudden you're going like 7, 6, 7, 6, 5, 6. Like I shot 17 shots in a row without ever having to reload, starting with only 12, right? So I think Envious had overflowed my mag to like 12 grenades in the mag, and because of Deconstruct, I was able to shoot 17 shots straight without having to reload, doing 40% extra damage. So it just deletes the brigs. It's hilarious. And then even in like the plate room where you have all the shanks coming out and everything, you just shoot a couple shots of Edge Transit and it just kind of annihilates everything, especially when everything's been debuffed by Collective Obligation and your tether, and you've got volatile rounds. Yeah, it's definitely fun. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on my Hunter this week. And then the only weapons that I was able to farm up this week were Scintillation, obviously, with Exodus Crash. I've got, I think, 18 in my vault here. I've already deleted like at least 12 between this between this one and the last time Scintillation was in rotation. But I've got 7 different rolls with rewind rounds and bait and switch now. So it was a pretty decent farm. And then I've got like an Envious Assassin with Reservoir Burst, which is pretty interesting, and auto-loading holster on the same weapon. So like I can choose between Envious and auto-loading with Reservoir Burst. That's kind of interesting to me. But I kept the rewind rounds, surrounded, and bait and switch rolls, right? So I think I've got 7 between surrounded and bait and switch with rewind rounds. It's very good with Vice Stinger, so you should be top tier for doing damage on dungeon and raid bosses. So I look forward to filtering through all of these and picking my go-to and sticking with it. And then other than that, I've got 18 Ascendant Alloys. Starting the week, I think I had 2. And I've also put enhanced perks on I've used at least 4 or 5 alloys this week. So, but yeah, that's basically it for this last week in Destiny. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.